Welcome back to the Creative AI podcast, where I talk with filmmakers, writers, and artists of all kinds about creating in the age of artificial intelligence. I'm your host, Andy Baker, and today I'm talking with Erin Reilly, founding director of Texas Immersive Lab at the University of Texas at Austin. She discusses her extensive experience with AI, particularly in the realms of immersive entertainment and education. She emphasizes the importance of using AI as a tool to enhance creativity rather than replace it, advocating for a critical approach to its use in creative workflows. Reilly also explores the potential of AI to affect social change and the need for students to engage with these technologies to prepare for future careers. The discussion highlights the evolving landscape of AI in education and the creative industries, encouraging experimentation and innovation. Like me, when you get to the end of this episode, you too are going to wish you could take a class from Dr. Reilly. She's brilliant, funny, and the perfect person to be experimenting at the outer edge of AI. All right, so I am on here with Erin Reilly, and I could spend about a half an hour with all of her various titles and accolades, but she is the founding director of Texas Immersive Institute in the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas at Austin, and she is at the cutting edge of all of this stuff, and she plays with AI, the tools, her knowledge, she teaches other people how to use it. And so she is going to be a fascinating guest. So, Erin, if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself to the audience and talk a little bit about your background and sort of where you are now and how you got to this point.
Thanks for welcoming me, Andy. I'm excited to be here. So let's see, where did I begin? Specifically with AI, I've been working on it now for well over a decade. Wow. That's kind of crazy. When I was working at the Annenberg Innovation Lab at USC, we had IBM as our sponsor, and I was doing a lot of work on leveraging engagement, on fan engagement, really trying to identify why fans were passionate and motivated to be passionate in their fandoms, and going from like a global sports study to looking at music fans to looking at Ellen DeGeneres fans to looking at Disney fans, I did a lot of different studies and really identified 8 core motivators that had us engage in our passions. And why IBM was interested is because while I was an ethnographer and focusing on like hanging out a lot at the bars and going to the stadiums and observing kind of fans in action, I also was really interested in thinking about moving away from sentiment analysis to actually thinking about scraping data and building our own natural language processing model based on what people were saying in social media. So we started scraping data and creating a coding structure for thinking about the language that people use to say that I am motivated in mastering my passion. I want to learn everything, whether it's all the stats and statistics of who made what goal, to Star Wars fans who were like, no, it's about this character and this planet and this this ship. So very different types of learning, but they were all motivated for becoming the encyclopedic fan. To people like me who really want to see myself represented in my passion. I feel like I'm a strong, independent woman, and I want to see strong, independent women leading my shows, my TV shows that I like, or kind of that kind of identity and representation of family and seeing family connections and stories and stuff. And that is a different way of being motivated in your passion. And there are many others, but that kind of was the eye-opener for me, is you could actually scrape different fandoms on social media that were having these conversations via Reddit, via Facebook, via Twitter, or X, wasn't there at the time, and then start looking and kind of analyzing not just specific words, but specific phrases that related to a specific actionable moment of being motivated. IBM was like, wow, we could take this and we could put it into Watson. We could actually take this, create a model, and then be able to identify, let's say from an entertainment perspective, identify if people are churning on Game of Thrones, and what would be if we put in scripts, what would be the next story that they could be churned to, in order to start thinking like a direct TV standpoint, which was another sponsor, how we could create kind of strategies of keeping them on TV longer from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock when the next show comes on. And so it was really interesting to think about being attentive and aware to personalization, and, making sure that you are really identifying through their interests what was important. But it also gave me kind of like almost like an ick factor. Oh my God, I can sit down with you and have a conversation, and I can probably understand what will leverage your engagement further and give you pointers and strategies of how we can enhance your fan engagement. But to know that that was being done behind the scenes too, and how that model could be used, not like how I originally thought about it, made me think, oh, wow, do we know what we're doing with our data and who owns our data and how that data is being shaped? So it gave me kind of like two sides of the coin. This is really positive in my own interest, but also, oh, wow, who owns my data? How is my data being used? And how are these algorithms going to create kind of these, what we know as filtered bubbles, right? And how do I get out of that if I'm helping to propagate that even further,
Yeah, well, it's certainly, while you were saying that, I was thinking about, you go on a Netflix, and if you've been on Netflix long enough, its ability to okay, you're just feeding me the stuff that you think I like. But then I look at my wife's feed or my son's feed, and it's different. And it's wait a minute, that looks interesting, but you're not feeding that to me because it's not a part of my personal algorithm. And you start to realize okay, to some degree, okay, you're feeding me things that I want. I like that. But at the same time, it's it starts to channel you down a path, and you realize you're using information about me in ways where maybe I'm not 100% on board with that. But like you said, it's that double-edged sword piece. But so you've been around AI, like you said, for a decade. And so those were your early days. You're way ahead of the curve, and you're aware that this is going on. And then, obviously, people point to these big moments like ChatGPT being released to the world. But you've seen steps along the way. And I'm curious about as a professor, you're seeking out these opportunities and these tools and seeing what's out there and playing with it. I'm just curious, walk us through a little bit about your evolution as an AI adopter.
Yeah.
And those moments where you were realizing, oh, this is where things are headed and it's really going to change things.
Yeah, I took a break a little bit after that stint. But what got me hooked again was when I started thinking about how AI could help with character development. And that was when I finally got here to UT, and I was really thinking about, I'm so done with a branching narrative. It'd be really interesting to think about more procedural, that it really personalizes it to me. What does that look like? And a professor from the School of Nursing came to me, and she was like, I'm an asthma expert, and I find that young adults 16 to 24 really want to, they learn best about learning to manage and communicate their own chronic disease when they are independent and not relying on their families anymore with their peers. And I was like, well, here's an opportunity, because I had been playing with the early GPT before it blew up. I was on GPT-2, GPT-3, and I was kind of experimenting with it. And everyone was talking about, oh, AI will solve all these problems. And I was like, actually, from what I've learned with my past work and now playing with this, AI is fallible, but we're wanting it to be so perfect, right? And I was like, well, why are we trying to make it perfect? What if we kind of lean in that it is fallible? And what if I created a character that knew it was fallible and could make mistakes, And so that was my approach with working with asthma, is well, if they learn best from peers are learning with their peers, they don't know everything. So maybe it would be fun to create a generative AI character that like only knows enough and kind of replicates you a little bit, so that mirrors you. So that way, if they do make a mistake and you know it's wrong, it can go, well, I'm learning too. I thought would be like more appropriate for AI than be like, I'm your learning agent and I know everything. It just does not work for me. So I created Moose, which was an anthropomorphic character that was like focused on two things. One, it didn't have to be perfect because it was fallible. So I would put as much information about the asthma expertise from Dr. Ree as possible. But I also was like, maybe if they're supposed to be a peer, we should focus on social and emotional and like friendship modeling. So we built this model on different variables. We built this huge back model on a character bio of Moose and what they knew about asthma. And then we really started to think about a friendship reciprocity model where there are different ways you become a friend with someone. And so we were trying to create variables of what you say when you're just getting to know someone and like, you're nice, but we're still in the new stage to, oh, wow, you're my best friend. And how long does it take to become besties if you are actually growing and having this generative AI character together, friend? We did a lot of tests. And in the end, we mirrored, because friendship is not about similarities, but it is also about that there's something different about between us that makes us kind of connect to each other. So we did a mirror of you by 60% of what you said and shared. And 40% was being pulled from the bio that we created of what made Moose different than you. And I think and we're still playing around and experimenting it with it. Camp Cura it just received an innovation award here at UT, and we're continuing to build upon it. But I think that's interesting about AI is like, I think we can try getting it to be a human, but if you only try getting it to be human in like nonfiction material of like just rote knowledge, then you're not being human, because we're not robots. And I thought that was a fun way to start thinking about it a little bit differently.
Absolutely. A couple of things you touched on there. One, having that someone who is helping you learn, anyone who's been a teacher, that students, it resonates with them when you get something wrong. And when you admit that you're
not perfect.
Yeah. And then we own it. And they're like, oh, like, you don't have to be the sage on the stage all the time. And you're a person that I can connect with because, like you said, we're all fallible. That sort of social emotional piece. And not to go too far off on a tangent here, but that perfection piece. I've had people talk on other podcasts about the idea that people keep talking about hallucinations and the power of words, right? Originally, they make mistakes. And then the word hallucination came out of the various LLM companies where they're like, we don't want to talk about them as mistakes. They're hallucinations. We're softening it somewhat. But I really liked the choice of words, whether or not they meant it, where it's like, as someone was saying on this podcast, that's creativity. It's not a mistake. It is a part of, just the flaws of anything. And then you fill in those gaps and you try to come up with the answer. And yeah, it might be made up, but hey, the AI just made something up. It didn't exist beforehand. So that idea of creativity, it is capable of it if we're not asking it for perfection.
That's right.
Lean into the flaws, which again, I find fascinating. And so you have not only made Moose, as I understand it, you made you.
Did. I totally did.
Tell us about that.
So I have a digital twin. Her name is Professor Moxie, which my students came up with. They say I'm full of moxie, which I love. So I think a lot of professors get tired of answering the same questions day in and day out. And if you're going to have an office hour with me, I really want us to have some interesting conversation and not just to answer something that's just basic. So that was my first reaction of like, okay, I can create a Professor Moxie and they can tell you how to apply to get into Texas Immersive. And I don't need to, and my staff doesn't need to either. So that was my first one. And that's really what like a GPT assistant is really good for right now, is like that basic kind of knowledge. And we built before Moxie, we actually built Texas TXI Explorer, a GPT assistant to like just answer all of that data information collection. And it's now on our website, and it helps, boy, cut down so many questions. With Professor Moxie, I was playing around with Charisma, and Charisma was a virtual being character. I did a lot of research on virtual beings. And I really, really have found, especially with my college students, that, chats and all text-based is very much something you are just trying to gather and get information. And I don't think it's really good for a tutor. I don't think it's really good for a learning agent. I think it's kind of, people have been doing learning agents for a very long time, and people that have inspired me for 2 decades. So, and I feel like we've been doing this for a while, that if we're just doing text-based learning agents, we're not innovating. But virtual beings, now I'm putting kind of a character in, like myself, and you're a character. We're all characters. What does our digital avatar look like? How can it come alive? I think that people want to have more than just having to read, which also addresses the learning disabilities. If I can have a voice conversation with you, or if you can see something and, get connected, I think would be really important. What's interesting about it is Charisma didn't work out very well. I switched to Inworld, and Inworld is really I think it's the most powerful NPC character generator right now for a lot of the AAA games. I'm lucky that they let me play with it and experiment with it in an educational institution. And I not only built the whole back-end knowledge, I did some extensive work with it, but then what I did was I connected all the APIs. I built my Ready Player Me avatar, and it was an API into Inworld. I recorded my voice with 11 Labs because I didn't want to use just a generated robotic voice. I have a particular sound, and I wanted my sound and inflection to come in through my digital twin as well. So I took 11 Labs and recorded that, and now Moxie sounds like me, looks like me. And then we are continuing to add more models based on not just all my writings and all my courses, but we started putting different nuances of me. Like I get idioms wrong all the time. And students, I think, kind of get it, or like they're like, does she mean that? She kind of means this. And they're starting to call them Erinisms. And I'm like, okay, well, yeah. And my mind is going so fast. I'm thinking about something, And so we started putting a few Erinisms into Moxie, and I talk a lot with my hands. And so we've kind of added that whole back end personality of like that she's kind of over the top and everything. I would say she's getting there. She's sometimes a little too over the top that when I talk to her, I'm like, I don't think I'm like that. But maybe I am. Who knows,
Well, it's kind of like having a tween, as I have one at home, when she's trying sarcasm on for size, but has not yet modulated. And so it's like, as if, like, yeah. Okay, like you can dial it back. It'll still be effective. Just need to play with the dials a little bit. But they're learning and growing. I do find it fascinating. You're talking about game NPC generators. There was a company that I was talking to about a project, and they were working with this where, there's a time that's coming very soon with AAA games where, some of those games are so expansive. There are these layers of experience, and you're the expert here about immersion, but like you have the golden path of the game that, everyone, if you want to get to the end, there you go. But there's so much content and so much world to explore. You can choose your layer of immersion.
Yes.
But if you do 100% it, if you platinum the thing, then, everyone has the same platinum. They may not do it in the same order, but you're finding the same things and doing the same side missions. But we are ever so close to having AI-generated NPCs who are having a unique conversation with you, creating a unique side quest that you must go do that is being, it's sort of that extreme version of procedurally generated dungeons for games where it's like suddenly only I had this experience.
Yeah.
and how powerful that is in sort of the, if you see what you were talking about earlier about engagement, that there's sort of it's a commodity. I know all of this and I've experienced all of this, but then within that world, it's unique to me, and how fascinating that is. And so you're playing with it in your classroom, but correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where things are going. This idea that you can inform a twin, and that you're going to be able to have these unique conversations with a version of yourself, as are the people who interact with it. They'll get a sense of who you are, but it's not 100% who you are.
Yeah, and I think that's good because you should see my calendar. People are like asking for meetings in April for just office hours. So it's like I would love to meet every student that wants to come sit down, but it's hard, when you're doing so many different things. So I love the idea that they're at least getting a taste, and then we can have that moment, and it might just create that personal connection. I mean, the other thing about having a virtual being is not only having like those personal moments where you get a flavor of who I am, but I assume down the line, and this is what I'm trying to experiment with, is that it can do things for me because everyone's got FOMO. Like I would love for it to do a few things for me and then come back and like share with me places I couldn't go or people I couldn't do. I mean, my Otter AI pops into meetings when I can't make it there in time already and provides notes for me. And I think that's super helpful because there's like, if I have a day with 8 meetings in a row, it's very hard to keep them all on track. So having those summaries are really helpful. And that's just text-based. So imagine when, we do more and more virtual conferences, my virtual being, Professor Moxie, can go sit in on a GOG's monthly virtual session where Ingrid Kopp is speaking. And I really want to go there, but I have class, and then she can tell me how it was, or like, here's some highlights, or you'll really want this for this class, and I feel like I have a personal assistant a little bit, like a personal teaching assistant, which is becoming rare these days, so I think it's nice to have a second TA on board for me, which I find.
I'm just looking forward to the day when it makes national news when someone at one of the tech companies, let's just say Meta for the fun of it, just to mess with Zuckerberg, but that everybody who's in the meeting is an avatar.
Yeah.
And then they get into a big argument and they start fighting with one another. So you end up getting these notes back saying like, oh my gosh, all the virtual us's were just at each other's throats, where it's like, okay, that was too real. Just take notes, please.
I would like to send it to my faculty meetings. What? That's a good idea.
There we are. Perfect.
My dean is going to be like, we need to talk.
But you can just say this is part of your research. It has to happen.
Well, it's part of I teach a creativity and AI class, and there students go through and I help them really unpack all the different media that is being impacted by AI and how you use it in the creative workflow process. And the class kind of writes itself. You start with text, right? And you start with basics. What is AI? And then how do you build a model? And then let's dig into it each medium: text, image, sound, video. And there's plenty of different companies, 3D modeling, building a website now, coding. You can kind of do every medium. There's generative AI applying to it. And I think I've brought in Moxie to that class. And I sometimes think that I could have Moxie teach the class and make it an asynchronous class. And I think that would be a much more interesting asynchronous class than just reading text and watching videos of me, because it would be able to have a little bit of call and response back and forth and have a discussion than just like watching a video and answering a Q&A, which is a lot of asynchronous classes. So it's in the works.
All right.
We'll see if I get in trouble by doing it, but I always apologize later.
Always better to beg for forgiveness than ask permission.
Exactly. Only way to get things done here.
But that is right in the wheelhouse of what this podcast is all about: creativity in AI, and how all of these tools that you're talking about, like you were touching on, it's this explosion right now. Every week, there are tools in all of those areas. The ones that tend to make a lot of news are, video and stuff, because we're visual creatures, like seeing the video and seeing images, text when it can suddenly is doing deep research. But it's, the example that, or the metaphor that a lot of people are using, it's the orchestra conductor, where you're like pulling in all the pieces to create something in the end. And I'm just fascinated to know, like, so they get this quick immersion in the latest tools. And by the time the class is over, the tools have changed, but, they're getting their heads around and they're using it. I'm curious, there are two fronts here. One, what you can tell us about the cutting edge stuff that you are doing research wise with your students, but also what they're creating with it, because they're at the beginning where it's like they're trying to hone their skills where there's this, it's not a generational divide, but like some people are early career, some people are mid career, some people are end career. And it's like they've spent all of this time developing these skills and now they can incorporate this into their workflow. But for students, it is the workflow. Like it's there from the very beginning. Well, and that's the question. That's why I throw it out to you as the expert. Like what are they making? How are they wrestling with it? And how do they feel about it?
Yeah, that's a good question and a lot to unpack. So I have been running the creativity and AI class here at Moody since our president a year ago said we're doing a year of AI. So that was December. Let's see, we're in 2025, so it was December 2023 when he announced that, and then my school director said, "Hey, it's a year of AI. What are you going to do?" And I'm like, well, I've been thinking about this AI class. I can prep it and have it ready for the fall 2024. And she was like, no. We need it January 2024. So I had like 1 week or 2 weeks over holiday to like figure out like how are we going to do a creativity and AI class. And luckily, I just called everybody I knew that was artists working in this space, and they all were generous to share and say, yeah, I'll come in and talk about sound and AI. Yeah, I'll come in. So it helped kind of like get all of these artists sharing, like everyone was experimenting back then. It was just a huge explosion. And we started putting together an Excel document of every medium with it. And you are right. I constantly change it to the point where the first week of class, I show students this Excel document of like, look at all these tools on every medium. Now go find a new one. And they have to continue to add to this Wikipedia of creative tools. What's interesting though is, okay, so we're in a year and a half now from doing this. The first semester, the class was full. It filled up in 24 hours. 3 of the 30 students had ever tried generative AI. 3. Okay. Every semester it gets better. But I think that's the interesting thing we think about with young adults is we often think like, and it's with every emerging technology. Oh, the youth get it. The youth understand it. The youth know it. The youth are playing with it. No, there's a sliver of them that are early adopters, just like older adults who are early adopters and have that type of growth mindset and curiosity to explore. But then there are some that are not, and that they need to hold their hand and come through it. And I think it's important that we have these type of classes so that way we can prepare them for the jobs that don't exist and the workforce that's going to come on them. Like I remember being in college right when Avid, like my senior year, Avid was introduced in digital media, and the computers were coming in and everyone was like, and I was being taught on A/B roll editing. Like what? And it was dead by the time I graduated. And I'll never forget that because I feel like that's what, if we don't have these classes, that's what's going to happen to every generation. They'll just be dead by the time they get out into the workforce. And so that was a real eye-opener because I was even surprised how little people had in 2024 had known it. So now they are. Now I'm seeing a lot more are starting to try it, and even the universities are adopting it. UT has adopted Microsoft Copilot. And they have an enterprise version of OpenAI, the GPT, though I pay for my own GPT because if they paid for it, they could access anything I do in it. And I think that's not really academic freedom. kind of freaked me out a little bit. So it's like, I'll just pay for my own, but they have been really generous in like paying. There's a lot of licenses with all these tools, and it's very hard to bring them in the class when they're not free, especially because I'm, at an HSI school, a lot of first generation, going to college, so lower socioeconomic, and they can't afford, these licenses and these fees to be adding up. So even in my first year of doing this class, we gave scholarships to every student so that they could actually try out all these tools, And I think that's important for accessibility, is to like have a fund so that young adults can try these tools. I think that's really important. The other thing that I've seen, what they do with them. Okay, so let's get past all the accessibility and how it's setting up, and
accessibility is really important. It's something I've touched on with a number of guests where, we talk about it in terms of like what a great tool this is and how amazing, and that this is what everybody's going to be using. But are they? Because it is expensive, and accessibility is going to become, it already is a privilege, but it is a way for people to, some will have it and some won't. I mean, we see it on the global scale where we're saying like, okay, we don't want certain countries to get certain chips and all of that, but it comes all the way down to the individual student and the individual person. Like what opportunity do you have? What awareness do you have, and being able to afford it?
Yeah, we call it the participation gap, and we've seen it in digital media. Even if it's there. Okay. So like you can use ChatGPT for free, but you're using a lesser version than if you paid for it, so therefore you're not getting to participate as well as others that have the income to be able to try out the new, more novel way. So they'll get a leg up when it comes to like being prepared for the workforce. And if you're only relying on the licenses that your university provides, well, they are picking ones, that might not be the creative tools. Or, like I like Copilot, but Copilot serves a certain type of function on productivity, where OpenAI has a little bit more freedom in creative expression. So, and every tool is different. I'm not trying to pit one against the other, but like if you're not trying a variety of different generative AI text tools, you're not doing a good critical analysis and really kind of being literate in how these each function, so it's better to try them all than only get stuck on just one. And that goes for text, for image, for video. It goes for all of them. Kyber and RunwayML are totally different types of generative video platforms, and they have a different look. They serve a different purpose, and depending on what type of short story I'm trying to unfold in there would be the one I would recommend.
Yeah. And there was an article written by Jesse Alexander, who was on this podcast, longtime screenwriter, and he is playing with all the tools. And he has this one really long, very helpful blog where it's like, okay, this is what I use ChatGPT for. This is what I use Perplexity for. This is what I use Claude for, because Claude's better at this. And like this entire workflow. And I use Gemini for some research and double checking things. And it's fascinating, and it highlights everything you're saying. It's like, of course, I'm reading this and I'm like, how much are you paying a month for all of those different subscriptions? And yet they are incredibly powerful tools. And like you said, you have to experiment to be able to figure out what works for what you're trying to do in that particular moment.
Yeah, we finally got rid of the cable bill, and now we're just putting it to all our generative tools.
So I cut you off there because you were about to go into like the students, now you get past the accessibility, they're using the tools.
So what are they doing with it? Right.
Yeah.
Like, what are they making? So in the class, I, as like a world builder, I help them think about the future. I think if you're using a new and novel tools, you should be really thinking about ways that you can utilize them to affect change. Right. So that's kind of my motto, is like, let's do some what if scenarios and let's future build on like, what is the type of world that we want to look like? I've had to do that with corporations forever. Cisco brings me in and says, we have all this cool technology, but how are humans going to use it? And we've had to go and do like big video productions to kind of do those kind of day in the life and future scenario stories to help people like understand, or for them to sell their products. Now AI allows you to do that so easy, that you can even at least get a start going or use it as your storyboarding before you go into production. So it really, from a pre-production perspective, it's going to save you so much time. So I teach them how to do design fictions, which is a form of prototyping for storytelling. And they have to think of a what if scenario and a social impact and create design fictions, whether they're doing a design fiction with a generative character, using something like Inworld and like having them be like a new type of virtual being addressing some sort of issue or assistant or support in some way, to doing an actual short story, like how often Cisco or these big Samsung, they do these kind of future design fiction stories to like prove out what their technology can do. Or they could like build a whole entire like Playbook AI is like a whole 3D modeling, or you can do a website and learn how to code and build a whole new website with it. So they could use those tools. Instead of using Wix or Square, they can use those tools and create a whole new website, which they didn't even know they could do. So there's a lot of kind of choice in how you use them, but the goal is use it for good, right? Use it to kind of move what is in your head out into the world in kind of a different way than what they have. And they're having a lot of success because RunwayML and a lot of others are doing generative AI competitions. So they're wanting to see how young or any young creator is trying out these new tools. And I think we're setting them up to not only show how they can use them in the workforce, but show kind of these technologies, the possibilities, and I always get surprised by what they bring back to me.
What's fascinating, so many things there I wanted to touch on, but starting with the competitions, and in a very short amount of time, because I've been monitoring this, where you had these film festivals and coming at it where it's like, okay, only a certain percentage, like we don't want AI material. You stay away from that. We want, fidelity to film. And now you see all of these AI film festivals popping up all over the place, right, where it's like, hey, this is the way things are going. Show us what you're capable of. And you see some of these short films, they're all over LinkedIn. It is astounding how empowered people are to create something where, and I'm eager to talk to more of them. I've got a few of them coming up where it's like, this is, you wanting to ask them, like, is this something you could have made a year ago?
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I'm in my faculty positions in the School of Advertising, right? And so a lot of the creatives are, there's been controversy even in the faculty on like, should we be teaching our creative directors, our art directors, AI tools? And there are some that are like, no, they need to learn how to conceptualize and do their own artwork and learn the Adobe. And Adobe already has incorporated AI. So it kind of makes me giggle a little when they're like, no, learn the tools, What good? Tools are already adopting it before they get into it. And I think their concern is like, they're still young and they need to learn how to conceptualize and have a good idea before they use that tool. And I kind of disagree. I think that AI is a catalyst to conceptualize in new ways. That you have to have a brain and you have to be creative. But why not use the tools to become even more creative if it opens it up? The thing that I think everybody needs to be is to be a critical creator, and I think that's what we need to be teaching them, is like to be critical if you're using it as a catalyst and, not defining what you're doing, but kind of having a conversation just like you would be having with another creative sitting around a table. Be critical at what they're giving you, don't just take it for value and be like, that's amazing, I mean, you should be pushing back and like going, but what if, or yes, and let's use that improv method of yes, and, or yes, but, like just keep questioning the possibilities of it. And I think that's what AI can never do, is it can't lose our curiosity of like what we see out in the world. They're not out, they're in the world, but they're not out in the world observing how we are as humans. Can they dream? Can AI dream? Like
Do androids dream of electric sheep, right?
Exactly. So, what dreams do you bring to that conversation, and how do you push it to be better?
And it's interesting that you say that because it harkens back to something we were talking about earlier in this conversation, this idea of the active creation. I like what you were saying about it being a catalyst for a new way, in that when I was in film school or grad school, or not, well, this was in undergrad, was taking film classes, and I had to shoot on 16 millimeter film. And so I had to physically cut that stuff. I had to change the reels in the camera in a big black bag so nothing got exposed. And my son can just shoot everything on his phone and then edit it on his laptop. He's still telling a story. He's telling a visual story. He has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. He never has to learn how to use a 16 millimeter camera unless he wants to.
Right.
But that's like playing with an antique toy. So this idea of you need to learn how to conceptualize with, in the absence of any tool. Why? Like, I understand you're going to develop these underlying skills and you're still going to have to tell a story or find a way to bring something into the world as a maker or a creator. Use the tools because everybody used whatever tools they had at the time.
Yeah.
So
this is hard.
Yeah, and why deprive yourself if, like you said, you have to be critical about it? In talking to a screenwriter, he was just saying you need to do the reps. Like, these tools give you the opportunity to have a sounding board and accelerate through some of the creative phases, perhaps, but you need to get up every day and write.
Yeah.
And that's the reps. So it's fascinating when people try to push the tools away rather than it's like, okay, no, establish a relationship with it because it's going to be a part of every bit of creation you do from now on.
Yeah.
Because
totally
these
agree.
are the tools.
Yeah.
One last thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap up, and you touched on it just a minute ago, you're focusing on the what if, but also the affecting change, social impact, which I love. It's beautiful.
Thank you.
And certainly, like, one of the big sticking points I found the more I talk to people, there's a handful of things that people will debate about, like, okay, is it meant to be hard, the act of creation? Is this making it too easy? Am I learning the things? One of the sticking points is this idea of where it feels like we're in a foot race between, like, the tools are neutral, but you can do great and wondrous things with it, whether it's in science or art. And then there are, these efforts to, there are the larger social impact pieces, but even in the act of storytelling and creation, talking about big, bad, evil corporations who are just like, we want to hire a few people and hand everything over to AI and just have you shepherd it. And it's sort of blowing up the paradigm and all of that. Very long-winded way of asking you sort of where you are in that continuum for hopeful, looking forward and seeing what AI is doing and and you're right at the forefront of it because you're looking into the eyes of these students who are wrestling with it. And they're the ones going to be doing this work long after we're done. And so where do you land on that about what does the future hold for AI and creation?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I feel like a lot of students art students specifically, are really struggling with where do I fit into this equation now if AI can do art, right? If AI can be creative. And I try telling them that it's only as creative as what you put into it, right? Like that you can't think of it that it's replacing you, but it can enhance you. And some students don't think that. They really think that they're very much focused on their craft and they feel like it's shortcutting their craft. And, or that who gets credit then? Are they crafting, and I kind of feel like they might be doing themselves a disservice if they don't at least experiment. What I hate is when a student comes to me and has such, issues with it and they've never even tried it, which happens, and I feel like you can't really have a critical eye on something unless you've stepped in those shoes or, experimented with it and saw what you like and don't like. Because if you're to already immediately say you don't like something, you're only listening to others to make that opinion. And you're not kind of, and I feel like these tools, yeah, there's a lot been written about it, but it's like, I'll go back. I remember hiring a postdoc and they got their PhD on Facebook and did not have a Facebook account. And it's kind of like that. It's like, write so much about it if you've never been in it, like, are you really a fan if you're, you're just talking? So to me, I feel like that's my first kind of pushback. If a student is like, I'm not doing it. It's like, well, don't do it until you've tried it. Like at least try it, at least experiment, at least play. And then I think that there are some concerns, which are concerns for me too, and I have a book chapter coming out in the Remix handbook. I've been thinking about Remix my whole life, right? I love standing on the shoulders of giants, right? I think that there's so many people for us, and we do not look back in history enough to actually really know where to go forward unless we look back in history. And so I am a big remix culture fan. And I kind of feel like AI is like that. It's only putting in everything we've known of history, but we have to make sense of our present and our future. Right. And so there are concerns like copyright and fair use. Whose IP is what once you start adding in these tools, but we haven't given IP issues to other tools. So it's like, I don't know why we didn't give it to spell check, and we don't, we haven't given it to Grammarly, and we don't worry about grammar anymore. And we've written about this it's called distributed cognition. You are freeing your mind up to do higher level thinking, cognitive thinking, and letting some of this go in order to free your brain space up for that. And I don't feel like we're there. Maybe one day we will be, but I don't feel like AI is there where it's going to take over my higher order thinking. It might support me and make me think better, or remember something that I forgot, but I don't think it's going to replace it. As far as like copyright and fair use, I think that it's interesting to think about open AI models. And ones that I don't like the idea of someone else owning my data. I never have. And I think that we are trying slowly with like the whole Web3 and the blockchain that maybe one day we will own our own data. And I think AI will push us towards that where people will get credit. Like I remember when we were doing Creative Commons, MIT and Harvard got together and we were really brainstorming kind of like the ethical issues of Creative Commons. And I always kept on thinking like, why isn't someone at MIT building Meta that could just travel with people everywhere? Wouldn't that be great for Creative Commons and fair use and everything? And people are like, oh, that's not possible. And I'm like, well, maybe now it is that we can track things with these big open AI data sets, so maybe that will help address copyright. But I also, after interviewing creators about copyright, there are artists out there that think that the copyright laws are old, and they need to be reimagined for a new society that uses AI and is based on AI. And I think from an immersive perspective, like when I think about immersion and where if we really want to be in a pervasive, ubiquitous world, it's going to be powered by AI. And if we want reactive spaces, for that persistence, where I don't have to keep on staring at a 2D brick in my face while I walk around the world, it's going to be powered by AI, so we just kind of need to understand what our relationship with it is and what we want, and then advocate for it.
Yeah, the advocation is key. I had a young man who talked quite a bit about that, an industrial designer, but is playing around with immersive spaces and that idea of advocating for what is real and what we do with this. I do feel for students and have empathy for them in that when they look at us, they say, well, you got to play in the sandbox before the toys started getting taken away or being co-opted or changing on you. I'm in a world where I'm in the sandbox, or I'm trying to get into the sandbox, and the toys just keep changing. They're in there and they leave, and they're in there, they're better and they're new. And
welcome to life.
And it's just like, it's okay. The sandbox will still be there. We still want to tell stories. We
Yeah.
still want to create. That is a very human impulse. And so there is still going to be a need for all the people that you are teaching and encouraging and shepherding into this great unknown. We need more people like you in the world teaching these students. I mean, my son is wrestling with this. He's a freshman in college and he's a musician. But the desire to understand these tools and how they're changing everything and instilling in them sort of this, an encouragement to experiment, to iterate, and embrace the possibilities rather than worrying too much about the unknown future, because you get to help make it. And so if you want it to be hopeful and you want it to be better, play with the tools, understand them, and then create something wonderful.
Yeah. Create something magical. I love it.
Fantastic. Well, this has been truly, truly a pleasure. Thank you for taking time out of, I'm hoping I'm talking to the real you this whole time.
I don't know. Are you?
I'll never know. But this is truly an enlightening conversation. And as I have said to many a guest, I would love to check in with you again a year down the road, where it's just like, all the stuff we're talking about, were we foolish? Were we silly? Were we on it? Because it's just, we're on the exponential curve. So who knows what the future holds. But again, I have a lot of faith because you're right there at the bleeding edge.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
All right. Be well. Thanks for listening to the Creative AI podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or visit creativeaipod.com.